Hi, I'm Dr. Warren Hastings from the Hart School in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm here with Jim Hilbie, one of our favorite cooperating teachers from Mystic Middle School in Stonington, Connecticut, here to talk to us about student teaching and being a mentor for the student teachers. So, Jim, why do you get involved in this? Why do you think it's important?
Well, first of all, it's my give back to the profession. Um, and also, selfishly, I want to know what's happening in the university, what's new. And so it's a self reflection. So by mentoring someone else, I think about my own teaching. I've been teaching 31 years, and I'm still willing to and want to get better, because when I don't want to get better, that's when I have to get out.
Yes, indeed.
So, yes.
Excellent. So, when we ask you to take a student teacher, what's the process you start with?
The process I start with is it's important that I have an interview with the student. It's important that we have a fit, because what my expectations are and what I expect of them, I lay right out right away, because it's very important for them to know this, because then they can make a decision themselves also, because not everything's going to be a fit.
Sure.
And they have to understand one thing about the way I teach is that they're just because they're in this is instrumental, that there is singing required. We don't just turn off singing because they play an instrument. So there's singing required, and to me that's a very important thing. And the other thing is how they introduce themselves to the students is they have to perform for them.
Terrific.
And so they need to model right away, because students will gravitate to others and will respect them right away because of their musicianship. That's why we're there, and that's why
Yes.
they're there. So as soon as they hear them play, they immediately have respect for them. And as soon as they start teaching, they know that they've worked already for them.
Sure. Fantastic. So you've had this conversation and you've accepted them.
Mm-hmm.
So you just mentioned they're going to play for the students.
That's
Tell me
correct.
about the rest of their first week. What's that going to look like? What are you going to make them do or read or talk about? Or
Well, the first week they do some observing, because it's important that they observe and try to get them to where we're at, which is not easy to do. Because, once again, if the students can see that there's some connections, that the students, I don't call them student teachers, but that the student now that is a teacher knows what we've done, once again, they say, okay, so this person's a real person, they're going to be here for a while. The first order of business is they have to read this book called Lentil by Robert McCloskey. I'm going to show you right here. It's a great book. And it's about this little boy that doesn't think he can sing. And everyone can sing. He may not know how to use his voice. He picks up a harmonica and learns to play the harmonica, which I would think right away, if they tested his musical aptitude, he probably has a pretty good musical aptitude for tonality,
Sure.
which we use in the classroom also. So he ends up playing the harmonica, but it's very important that students, teachers, and us in general know that every student can learn. And the other part I give, I don't have them read this whole book, but it's the Free Play Improvisation by Stephen Machnanovich. And Michelangelo, there's a quote in there that Michelangelo said that there is a statue in every stone. And I want the students to understand that there is a musician in every student. And what we have to do is we have to dig and prod and chisel away until we can find it. But it's in there. Sometimes not as easy as some others, but it's in there, and so never to give up on students.
Great. Do you find them pretty receptive to that and they're able to implement that philosophy?
Oh yes, they have a good background. They come with good tools. They've been well educated, and that's one of the reasons I do like students from Hart, because I do know we've been working together, so I do know what their expectations are, what your expectations are.
Sure.
And so they're ready to go. They're a little surprised at Lentil, since it's a child's book, but like in a child's book, there's a lot of hidden meaning,
Yeah.
and they have to come back the next day and we discuss it.
Good. Always a message.
There you go.
All right. So they're getting comfortable. How do you ease them in? What's their workload become? What's your process there?
We ease them in. We ease them in, and then we wean them out later on. First thing they do is once again to observe, but then to start warming up the band.
Okay.
I don't just have them go in front of the band. First of all, they have to make sure that everything, before they teach, they have to have a lesson plan, which of course is expected from the university also. And we sit down and go over the lesson plan.
Okay.
It's not just about writing a lesson plan, it's practicing the lesson plan so they're ready to teach, so they have to practice. Then they have to practice what they're going to teach in front of me.
Okay.
So here they can kind of iron out some of the wrinkles. Then many times, because I have small group lessons, they will then practice what they're going to conduct in front, or they're going to teach the full band in front of the small group lesson, so they get that.
I see.
They have at least maybe a third of the kids ready to go, so when they get up there, they have success.
Okay.
And we do this maybe the first couple weeks. Then after that, then of course I have them do more and more, but they start warming them up. And then eventually they get a piece of music that they, band score that they have to work on. They get this beforehand also, so they can start prepping it. And I have 4 grades. I have 8th grade, they come in, and depends on when the placement is, but usually it's like in the middle of leading into the spring, or spring concert.
Right.
The students have already learned their notes and rhythms, so they're going to come in as a guest conductor. And they're going to teach, they have to, like going to a festival, notes and rhythms are down, it's for them to make music.
Good.
7th grade, most of the song is learned, then they have to take it and move it. 6th grade, from the bottom up. They have to teach them they have to model first of the melody of the song, then you have to teach them the song by ear, decoding, and then they go through that. And then 5th grade, they usually take a song that I want them to teach them, just a head tune, and then take them through a whole long process.
Okay.
So a little bit at a time, and then before you know it, they're in front. Now I conduct a couple songs they do, so we share the time. I put a time limit so they know exactly on the board exactly how much time, because as teachers we have to follow time, and then they get to conduct the concert.
Okay. How do you structure your feedback to them? What's that look like? What form? How often?
It's nonstop. It's continuous. When we have a prep, which of course nowadays people use their prep for emailing, we actually use a prep to prep.
Okay.
So we find out what we're going to do the next couple days. We have a plan, because the worst thing is to come in and not have a plan.
Right.
So they have a plan. And what I do is I script them, and I'm a terrible scripter, but it's messy, but they get to read my mess. And then we sit down, and I don't make judgments, I just write down exactly what they say. And then we sit down and we talk about it. And then I encourage them, and they do this, and they're required to do this, is to videotape themselves. So then after 2 or 3 weeks of us sitting down as close to their lesson that they just thought as possible, then they start reflecting on their own on the video, and then we talk about it, but they get more feedback that way than me sitting there. And I don't tell them, I ask them questions.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell them what they did. It's just they have to tell me. And I may say, why did you do this? So they can explain why they did what they did.
Okay. So you mentioned most of the time they get to conduct on a concert. It depends
That's
on
correct.
the timing of the placement, certainly. But are there any other major projects you typically take them through, or is it just the day-to-day teaching?
No, probably one of the main projects is in the 5th grade. They'll take maybe, let's say, America. And the first thing they'll need, and they'll take them through the entire process of, they will have to sing the song for them. They'll model it on either their instrument or a secondary instrument, because they are required to use secondary instruments. And then they'll teach them to sing the song, and then have the students decode, which is a high level of intelligence, of course, but we don't do that till later on, and they've already been set to do this. And then we give them, and then they're required to type out, using technology, of course, the music notation.
Right.
So then they connect their learning by ear to notation, and then they record them. Then they have to play a piano accompaniment with them as they perform.
Okay.
And then we record them. They develop a student rubric, a student-generated rubric, which of course we all know that's really not a student-generated rubric. You have the rubric in your head. You just have to pull it out of them so they think it's theirs. Because if you go in there with nothing, you're going to be there forever.
Sure.
So then as you record, fill out the rubric, sit with the students and say, look, I want you to listen to one item. Let's say maybe tempo, maybe an issue with tempo, because you can't have them listen to everything. It's too much. So one item, conferencing one-on-one, because we can do that, because then I can teach while they're conferencing. And then they send it home to the parents. Students bring it back signed to say what they did, and on there has to be a comment on what they did very well, and of course what they can do to be better, which is a really all-encompassing unit.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's terrific.
Yep.
So you mentioned they send that home to the parents, and the parents have to sign it.
Correct.
Do they get any other opportunities to interact with parents, or do you make them make phone calls, or how much do they do that way?
And generally speaking, well, we don't have an awful lot of discipline problems. So as far as phone calls go, not too much. If a student teacher needs to speak to someone because they maybe did something that was either disrespectful or so forth, I'm always there with them, because I don't really have any. The student teachers don't want to be in a compromising situation where I said this or they said that.
Sure.
So I'm always with them. They do write 2 letters. One to our Cubs Chronicle, which goes home to all the parents. It's their newsletter. to say who they are, to introduce themselves, and at the very end to say how their experience was at Mystic Middle School.
Okay.
So they have a fair amount of contact with parents, and of course, before and after school, parents come in, I introduce them
Sure.
and get to know.
Okay.
Yep.
So you mentioned they conduct on the concert.
Yes.
Do they interact at the concert with the parents, or how does that look?
See, I'm not required to speak at the concert. I have someone that speaks for me, but they're required to speak at the concert and tell and shed a little bit of history on the selection. And if there, of course, there's going to be something historical about each selection that we select, and then tell the parents about it, and then in some cases have the band. We did a more contemporary piece and have the band demonstrate parts of it, so then when the parents hear this piece, it's a little bit more. They have a little bit more knowledge base than just listening. Because listen to a contemporary piece if you don't know anything about it.
Sure.
It's nice at the end if you tell them, but that's too late.
Sure.
So before every song, they have to speak.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, in the day-to-day,
Yep.
they're teaching a little bit at first, and you eventually
Right.
give them a full load. How do you manage interjecting, interrupting, letting them stumble a little bit? How do you manage that? Because you have your own students that you need to make sure they progress and make it through your curriculum, yet the student teachers are struggling some. How do you manage that day-to-day, how much to interrupt?
Well, I share with the students that now that we have another person in the room, that there's going to be some dialogue at times. So I always like to make my students aware that at some point, it's not that one is right, one's wrong, but if I do something that sometimes in the moment you go so fast that you may be singing the right pitches but the wrong solfa, it's important that there's someone else in the room now that can say, I think you meant to say so, and I do this, and we go back and forth with that. Generally speaking, I like to have them go through, and I don't want to see them squirm too much, but there's at times you have to kind of really think about what you want to do and how you want to do it.
Yeah.
And if I think it's going to be, it's going really kind of way out there, then I kind of bring it in real quick and say, why don't we try this?
Okay.
Never, this is the way it's supposed to be, because it has to be respect all the time.
Sure.
And so for the most part, because of our prepping and because we really plan accordingly, it doesn't happen a lot. And that's the whole thing. It's prep, prep, prep. If you go in prep and you know your scores and you don't have to look at the scores and you have everything you need down, your chord progressions, you know what's going on, you're going to be successful most of the time. So we do have some times that we discuss things, and it's okay to do that. But the students need to know this.
Sure.
If you just start interjecting things, then they can think one person knows more than the other, and that's not the case. It's a teamwork then.
Do you find that at some point you're eventually able to leave the room and leave them on their own, or is that not possible?
No, I could leave them on their own. Legally, I need to be somewhere close. Sometimes I will go out and say, I need to go to the office, and they of course say, no, I'm not leaving too far, and I go because I want the students they should behave the same way if I'm there or if I'm not there.
Yep.
But any which way I look at it, it is still, it's still your room, and of course, students are going to be who they are when you're not there.
Yes.
So I will go in the hallway, and I will lend my ear to the door, and I will be right there.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot of opportunity for them to be on their own. But if I stay in the back and I'm not, I'm not the forefront, students will forget that you're kind of even there. So they're going to be who they are anyway.
Okay.
So and they don't really care if you're in the room or not. If they're going to try something, they're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
So I do give them a good opportunity, I think, to and then sometimes I'll sit in my office, but I can still hear. I'm only an earshot away.
Sure.
Because once again, you don't ever want to be in a compromising situation where someone, a student says, well, they said this. I'm right there. I hear every word.
Of course. All right. What else can you think of about your general philosophy or approach that you think would be beneficial for people?
Let's see. I think that having them give them the opportunity. I always ask them. I say, is there something you've learned in school that you would like to give a try? If there's improvising, you're teaching the students to improvise, to compose, or something that you've been kind of eager to do, but you haven't had that opportunity. Because when you leave here, I don't want you to say, boy, I wish I gave that a shot. So during their midterm, we say, what here are we not covering?
Okay.
I use the evaluation that the university gives me, but I make them, I shouldn't say I make them, they have to fill it out themselves.
Okay.
And they have to give themselves numbers and feedback. I do it, and then we sit down and we say, okay, so where do we stand? If we're far away, then what their perception is and what my perception is different. We need to talk about it.
Sure.
So if the numbers are too far, generally speaking, they're harder on themselves than I am, so their grades are lower. And then I take notes down throughout the semester so I don't forget. Sometimes it happens. But I think that's really important for them to evaluate themselves, a formal evaluation. So the midterm and the final, they have to fill out exactly what I'm filling out.
Okay.
They have to come in and they have to be real honest about what's going on.
Sure.
And then we find out what are we doing, what do we need to go, and where do we need to go.
Sure.
And there's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of work, but they are students. They have to make their own copies. I make my own copies. We both set up the room. But when they leave, I can't be like feeling that, oh wow, now it's all mine again. We both do our own, we do our own thing. And there's enough space that we have too that we don't have to be around each other all the time. So there is that space too. You need the space.
Yeah, well, it's important to hear that to be a good cooperating teacher it adds to your workload. It doesn't take away from it. So
adds a lot.
We appreciate it.
And I think only a couple other things is there time management.
Mm-hmm.
Time and giving the students time to think. The Madeline Hunter format of think time. And it's important that the first person puts their hand up doesn't necessarily mean you have to call on them. Wait for other hands to go up because everyone thinks at a different rate of speed. I think that's really important. Higher order thinking questions are so important to try to get some of those out there. And if you only get 2 or 3 hands up, you more than likely either confuse them all or you did a great job.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's a great job.
Yeah.
And probably the most important thing, I think, in my position is to model. Everything I ask them to do, I try to model before. And I don't tell the kids I'm modeling it. I'm just teaching the way I normally teach. Nothing's contrived, just teach. But I like to model first so that we can talk about it. And then they can kind of see how it's going to go. Not say they have to do exactly like I'm doing, but at least I have somewhere to go.
Yeah.
And my words to them is, you collect all this different information from me, you're going to go to another placement, and then you then have to take it and figure out how you're going to use it to be the best teacher you can be.
Yeah.
Different methodologies, sound before sight, traditional, conversational SOFA, I use jump right in, I use a lot of things. So they have that kind of a melting pot of methodologies, which I think is so important. It's the sound before sight is my main thing, but I use traditional, and I use, if you want to call it traditional, just
Sure.
all the different things. And I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, so let me ask one final question.
Sure.
Can you think of any significant thing that you've changed in all of your years of having student teachers? What's the main way that you've changed the way that you approach this?
In having student teachers?
Yeah, I'm sure you've adapted and changed the way you do things and learned something. And
I think probably by giving them everything that they need to know before, I think they really appreciate that because it's important for them to know, no surprises. This is exactly what's expected of you, and here it is. Where when you first start off, of course, you have someone new and so forth. And also one thing too is timing. I put the time on the board that they start teaching and the time that they end, and they do get the hook. Because it's really, we all get into the moment. And before you know it, if you get into the moment, then I don't have my teaching time because I'm conducting 2 pieces at the concert.
right.
So we're sharing the time. So they have to understand that by giving them the time, they have to really make sure that they really go after what they have to get after. They have their objectives set. They know how they're going to flesh it out. They're going to do it. But I said time management probably, and giving them all that stuff I think is really, really important. Me, myself, every time they come in, I learned something. I learned something by listening to your conversation with them because, that's what we do is we learn.
Yeah, well, we appreciate that model. So
My
thank you
pleasure.
very much for being an exemplary cooperating teacher.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Contributing to our knowledge base, and we're sure it'll be helpful to a lot of university professors and cooperating teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.